This is going to be not a too long video, but it's just going to cover some of the recent information on COVID-19. It's going to sort of focus on some options that are out there. Some stuff will be, that I've already discussed in the past and brought up. I mean, so it's going to be varied in that regard. This is the little culprit, what it looks like under an electron microscope. Just bring that up. There it is. That's in New Science. You can actually see it there, and there it is in close quarters, close and personal. And I mean, now we've actually got really good imaging of the actual virus. We know it's real. This BS that's in parts of our community and in other parts as well, needs to stop. People are at risk. Health is at risk of many people, and I'm going to start calling these people out, and you guys need to start calling these people out as well as charlatans, because they're basically just talking BS. If they continue after we've got really good evidence that basically this is real, it's a real virus, people are getting affected, and all those videos that people talk about is a lot of nonsense, a lot of make-up stuff. There are a lot of people out there for their own reasons that have got axes to grind or whatever, and are promoting really a lot of disinformation in that regard. I'll tell you one thing, I'm not happy about all these restrictions either. I'm not happy about the violations of the Australian Constitution on a number of fronts. But the reality is that, I'll be out there protesting if basically once this virus goes and some of these things are still in effect. But at this stage, being sensible and understanding that, if we don't basically isolate ourselves to some extent, if we don't take precautions, we are putting other people at risk, and maybe some people can sleep better at night, knowing that. I'm not one of those people, so that's your personal choice in that regard. So basically, this is the sort of recent sort of magnification they're looking at it, and so they know what it looks like. That's the sort of SARS-CoV-2, the sort of sciencey type name that they've actually given it to differentiate between the previous SARS-CoV-1, and so that's scientific terminology just to differentiate. I mean, most people out there will call it the coronavirus, which coronavirus is just a generic name for all these different ones. The previous SARS, MERS that was in the Middle East and whatever else. So go back to this. This is really important. They're also talking about, can you catch it twice? So they've actually noticed that there were reports of a woman in Japan who had been given the all clear after having COVID-19 and then was retested positive for the SARS-CoV-2 virus a second time. There's also been a report of a man in Japan testing positive after being given the all clear, and anecdotal cases of second positives have emerged from China too. So this raises the fear that people may not develop immunity to the virus. This could mean that until we have an effective vaccine, we could all experience repeated rounds of infection. So that is a risk. Now, it's hard to say whether some of these people had immunocompromised organisms and weren't able to exhibit, and it was basically they went through the medical system and sort of had some of this clearing out. There's not enough information about the background of these people, their genetics. There's a lot of factors. I mean, I've got the norovirus as an example, which makes me very susceptible to type of viruses that you usually get on cruise ships. including this one. But not everybody has that susceptibility. So there's a lot of questions about who's got more susceptibility than others, and a lot of those sort of factors. So there's we'll learn more as this crisis continues, and we'll have a better understanding. But at this stage, we're still sort of in that early stage of trying to understand what's happening, and how this actual virus, behaves, and the sort of effects that it can have in a population, the varied effects. Yeah, this is another study that I came at. This in regards to, remember I actually mentioned vitamin D really important, that you need, good vitamin D status and stuff like that. There's a lot of nonsense going out there that, I'll just bring this up, that basically, vitamin D can sort of suppress cytokines and stuff like that. No, it doesn't. It just regulates them. It does not suppress cytokines and stuff like that. And this study was a randomized clinical trial. And we'll just go to the results. As you can see, these are the sort of groups that we're looking at. Sort of type of history. Tobacco history is not too dissimilar. The people on placebo actually were more smokers. So, you'd think that would actually make even the active form people that were on the vitamin D actually even more beneficial. So when we actually look at these values, we don't see much difference, sort of percentages. So when we're looking at the sort of percentages in terms of response, there are not a lot of differences. And the present study did not show an effect on vitamin D3 supplementation on the circulating levels of certain cytokines. So, and they were looking at, interleukin 2 and 6, interferon gamma, TNF alpha, and GMCS, which is basically colony stimulating factor 2. Actually, that's the correct name for it. CSF2, which they usually coin at it, which is a sort of a macrophage type thing. Will decrease under the influence of vitamin D, while the levels of interleukin 4, 5, 10, and 13 were expected to rise. We did not find that cytokine levels or changes in cytokine levels were responsive to vitamin D supplementation or related serums 25-OHD levels. However, there is accumulating evidence that vitamin D does significantly alter the immune system, and that's true, that it does have an effect on the way the immune system actually responds and regulates these sort of things. It has a number of other things that I've discussed these before about within the lungs, regulating sort of the collagen, because when you actually get an infection in the lungs, you get some damage of that tissue. And, the matrix metalloproteinases, which are the collagen degrading enzymes, are regulated by vitamin D3 primarily in the lungs. So it plays an important role in basically, keeping all that work in there and the repair work up to a certain scratch in that regards. Where vitamin D is important is basically with your killer T cells and all that. Your immune system is those are coated with vitamin D3 receptors. That's where you need it. So your immune system works properly in fighting this. And you need the vitamin D also at a good level to regulate that properly, so it doesn't over-respond, because the sort of cytokine storms that we get is usually people that are found to have much lower levels of vitamin D, which is really important to realize. just going back to this one here. Basically, cytokine storms, and this is again from New Science magazine. And diseases such as COVID-19 and influenza can be fatal due to the overreaction of the body's immune system called cytokine storm. And it just goes through, explaining about, cytokine storms are a common complication not only in COVID-19 and flu, but in other respiratory diseases caused by coronaviruses such as SARS, MERS. They're also associated with non-infectious diseases such as multiple sclerosis, pancreatitis. So, but that's irrelevant for us in that regard. So just keep that in mind that, that can be an issue as well. Basically, we'll just go on this abstraction. There's so many things. To go through. Vitamin D has been recently shown to promote antimicrobial responses through the reproduction of antibacterial peptides. That's true, and it also regulates some of those peptides as well. So stimulates of autophagy activity of macrophage, which is that colony stimulating factor 2. Significant association between vitamin D deficiency and increase in incidence of several infectious diseases. So we know that T cells, they are coated with basically vitamin D receptors. So, that's pretty much the sort of mechanism that basically if you are pushing out a lot of T cells and you basically don't have enough vitamin D to get them to do the job, then you're going to have a problem, because then your macrophages are starting start spilling out shitloads in an unregulated way, shitloads of these inflammatory type cytokines in order to try and kill things off. But too much sometimes can be a bit of a problem for the body. It's like a bit overkill. So that's where vitamin D plays a role in sort of regulating sort of macrophage in that regard. Just a quick overview of this sort of thing, which is really important. These coronaviruses are basically, as I said, they are basically respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract, obviously coming through the nose, coming through the mouth, coming through those mucosal type barriers is how they get in. So, have people in proximity, sneezing, coughing, stuff like that. I mean, they're talking about 2 meters, but they're actually shows that actually, depending on the conditions, can actually those droplets can actually spread even further than 2 meters. So I think a lot of people are saying now that really, if you're going out, you really need to be wearing a mask. So I mean, I think that's a given, because the problem is people are not following advice and are not basically sneezing or coughing into their elbow effectively. Sometimes people may have sort of the type of response where you don't have the time to do it because it just overwhelms you at that moment. So you're potentially putting other people at risk. So by having a mask on, it doesn't prevent you necessarily, but it can, impede the distance that something can travel. And if you've got social isolation, people keeping some distance between themselves, that mask can actually add some level of protection, that sort of situation, because people still need to eat, people still need to get things, they still need to sometimes get emergency items from a pharmacy. So it's just not practical to basically to become a hermit in. We are not bears that can hibernate for months, so it's not realistic, and neither does everybody have the capacity or resources money wise to basically support themselves effectively. So they go from paycheck to paycheck, and in those sort of circumstances you can only buy and get so many resources into your home. You will have to venture out more than once. Try to keep it to a minimum. I sort of try to keep it to 1 day a week. Go out, do everything that I need to do, at hours when there's not as many people around, and then get back and isolate myself. So yeah, it's not the lifestyle that I was looking forward to in 2020, but unfortunately, I do have some vulnerabilities that basically predisposes me genetically to these sort of issues. So I need to just be a bit extra cautious, unfortunately. Yeah, it's just one of those things. What can you do? It happens, as they say. So I'll just bring this up. Is recent electron micrographs that were actually done in Korea. This is the same study that Bart today actually showed. That's Bart was talking about identification of coronavirus isolation from a patient in Korea. Once to go and take a look at it, more than welcome. That's what it's called. That's what it looks like. Okay. Move on. We've already covered that. So again, the key things I've shown this study. This was one of the first studies that I actually showed, which was that Chinese study. So again, just to keep this in mind about symptoms people need to look out for, the main ones are fever and cough. So keep that in mind. Fever and cough are the other things. Sort of, if you've got basically a cough, even sneezing is not that high on this, but no fever, you may just have the common cold, or the seasonal flu. So you really have to have like 38.4, which was sort of number they were getting at, sort of levels. So unless you've got a good fever, less likely to have it. But then again, fever does. You could have the flu as well. It's unlikely, and the reason why I think it's unlikely is I don't think the flu is going to be that widespread, for the simple facts that people are isolating for so much. It only has a 1.28, in terms of virulence. If people are isolating to this level, profusely cleaning their hands and stuff like that, and taking all these steps, the probability of a high flu season is unlikely. So there is in Australia, I don't know about other countries, a new super vaccine, which takes all the actual strains. This time it doesn't only look at the previous strain, but actually every single strain that's actually out there, and basically giving people that are in high risk groups. And I would recommend that to high risk groups, for the simple fact that you don't want to end up with both the flu and COVID-19 at the same time. It's not going to be a happy ending. So keep that in mind. So if you're in a high risk group, get the damn thing. There's no excuse in that regard. So keep that in mind. We definitely live in interesting times. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Now, the key thing that's going to kill you, obviously, is pneumonia. So same thing with, and and MERS, basically pneumonia was the big respiratory infections. This is the thing that really causes a lot of the problems. So again, vitamin D plays a role here, so keep that in mind. And you just have to look at one study after another, and why. When are most flu-like symptoms and colds and stuff like that happening? The majority of the times it's in winter. When our vitamin D, or early spring, like in Europe now, where their vitamin D levels are very low. So you basically have this cytokine storm that happens because you don't have enough vitamin D to regulate, and also enough vitamin D to provide the the support to the T cells to fight off the infection in the early stages. So it gets into the system, it gets basically takes off in the system, and the only thing the body can do is just basically producing shitloads of cytokines in an uncontrolled way. That damn storm, and that is what is probably killing a lot of those people. So you got a cytokine storm on one hand, just basically destroying so much tissue in the lungs, and at the same time you've got bacterial or fungal type pneumonias that are actually taking off in the body. And take your pick, but it's the combination that eventually kills the most vulnerable people in that regard. This is sort of just a bit of a cover on that, on vitamin D. Influenza A virus causes severe epidemics of respiratory illness in humans and is transmitted through airborne droplets and by direct contact. It is characterized by acute neutrophil infiltration and narrowing of bronchial pronounce that, those little hairline structures. And controversially remains concerning whether there is a direct link between the seasonality of influenza vitamin D deficiency, which is observed more commonly in winter. I think there is. I mean, there's enough evidence. This is just a general overview. This article. That's why it's influenza infections involves both innate and adaptive arms of the immune system, or through vitamin D can inhibit pro-inflammatory cytokine releases by macrophage. That's important. Remember, that storm, that uncontrolled cytokine storm, that's where vitamin D plays a big role. Its ability to upregulate the expression of antimicrobial peptides is relevant, as these peptides can also inhibit antiviral activity. In addition, viral infections increase activation of vitamin D and increase cathelicidine production further, which is those peptides. Not only do immune cells secrete these antimicrobial peptides, which is one of them, but epithelial cells present in the upper and lower airways can also secrete them as a host of defense mechanisms against infections. So you can see how important in that first stage of attack by the virus into the system, coming through your respiratory system, where the importance of having a good status of vitamin D. And I've actually in previous videos I've mentioned that basically if you're an adult, you should be looking at 4,000 IUs, which is what you would get from sitting out in the sun. Normally, I usually would go to Asia in the winter months and sort of bump up my vitamin D levels, but I don't think I'll be getting out of the country anytime soon. So basically, I'll be upping my vitamin D eventually. I'm sort of currently I'm getting I'm just using about 1,000 IUs. I'm getting probably another 1,000 from the different foods that I'm eating, like eggs, dairy, seafood, these sort of things. And so I'm not upping it because I'm still getting out in the sun a bit, I'm still exposing myself to sunlight. So I'm still getting a bit in that regard. So I'm getting into those levels, that healthy levels. But as the winter progresses in the southern hemisphere, obviously I'll be forced to push up those levels. And and I go back to history. You look at TB epidemics and all these. When people put out into the sun in those sort of clinics back in the in the 30s and 20s and in the early part of the 20th century, those people did better. Vitamin D is important, guys. We can't neglect it at all. So upper respiratory tract infections, or common colds, as they know, are the most widespread of infectious diseases, with more than 200 viruses contributing to the clinical symptoms. There's plenty out there, but we've got the nasty one on the way. Early epidemiological studies found a strong association between rickets and respiratory tract infections. So, and that doesn't surprise me at all. Vitamin D deficiency contributes to both of those things. And a recent large cross-section study of the US population reported that vitamin D status is associated inversely with a recent URTI, and associations may be stronger in those with respiratory diseases such as asthma. Obviously, if you're an asthmatic or have bronchitis or stuff like that, or emphysema, or any of those sort of pulmonary type diseases, then you're going to be at higher risk. Randomized controlled trials are needed to examine the direct effects. Yes, that's true. But at the end of the day, when we're looking at these sort of statuses of vitamin D and all that, yes, they are epidemiology, but they're not like highly confounded. They are statistically strong results. They're not basically like nutritional epidemiology. That's a different kettle of fish. Nutritional epidemiology is trying to basically work out with mumbo jumbo statistics whether one food is more causal than another food. It's impossible. If you're eating so many different nutrients from so many different sources of food groups, how the hell are you going to work out which is a problem and all that? But when you're actually just looking at, one variable, you're saying, well, people that have basically got the seasonal flu, and then you're looking at vitamin D, is your level high or low, and what is your outcome? It's like the smoking stuff. Smoking, basically, either you have certain lung related issues or you don't. And if you're smoking, you're more likely to have those. There's going to be a strong statistical strength. So, and these are not basically questionnaires where they say, oh, fill out a questionnaire. No, they're actually taking measurements. So, yes, it is an epidemiology, but this is a classical epidemiology where you take measurements. Areas of where epidemiology can fall down a bit is when you're basically looking at, what is the percentage of mortality of a certain pathogen? Because if you don't test enough people, it's hard to know, because if you only test 5% of the population, but it's more widespread, but it's not affecting them as much, then you don't really know, whether this percentage here is indicative of, the wider community. So you need more testing in those terms to work out the severity of an infection. On that level, people can rightfully criticize these observational studies. But when it comes to when you're looking at a group of people that are suffering basically certain symptomatology, which is similar, that means they've got similar symptoms, but one has more better vitamin D status than the other, and one has better outcomes than the other, it's the statistical strength and the relationship is so strong that, when you're using the Bradford Hill criteria, the less vitamin D you have, the worse the outcomes. And that's how the Bradford Hill criteria works for epidemiology, where you've got strong statistical relationships, and you can infer, that this either does or doesn't. So and that's important to differentiate between nutritional junk epidemiology, which is just junk science, for tenure, to maintain people in university positions, and good quality stuff, which gives us an indication of whether one factor or another has a benefit or not. So that's important to differentiate those sort of things, because we sometimes don't, and we treat everything the same. We end up with more confusion than you can poke a stick at. So really important that we do those sort of things and make those differentiations. Now, there is also some additional information you've probably heard about. Little thing, which is chloroquine, and also quinine, which is another thing you get in tonic water. Now, when it comes to, I was going to make a slide, but I didn't. I should have, but anyway, a lack of time. And this sort of, the active component is, you're looking at 500 to 1,000 milligrams. Now, in tonic water, you get about 83 in a half decent tonic water. You'll get of the quinine, which it behaves very similar. This is why back in the colonial sort of days, in the 30s and 20s and all that, a lot of soldiers were using tonic water to deal with malaria out in the field. So that was their sort of go-to thing. To get the same sort of level of 500 milligrams, because each bottle has about 83 on average, you're looking at about 6 bottles a day. So, that means if you're at the early stage, when you hit this sort of thing, you probably need, quite a few bottles, as you can understand, to get the dose. So if you can get the actual active ingredient from somewhere, good for you. If you can't, then the poor man's option is basically the tonic water. So join the club. That's what I'll be doing, because I've been trying to actually get some of these sort of things, and I've just been hitting blank, unfortunately. So I can't even point you to any good source, and I'm even trying to see whether I can, I don't want to say, because I don't want it to be intercepted. So in that regard, I'll say no more. But tonic water is your next best option, and also, so one important thing that you need to actually suppress, and I've actually mentioned it before. I know I'm sounding like a broken record about vitamin D and also about zinc. But zinc's important, and as I said last time, it basically inhibits viral replication in cells, so it's important. There's a few, things. So the important thing is that this quinine, what it does is it helps increase the actual it helps get more zinc into the cell to increase the inhibition of replication, which is really important. So, that's why I think carnivore diet is actually very beneficial, because it's high in zinc. Throw in a few oysters, yeah, fantastic. So, but getting access to those things sometimes can be a problem. So I've said to people, well, even though I don't recommend a lot of things like supplements and all that, because they're high in deuterium, and I do have concerns of going too wild with supplements. This is a supplement that I would actually store in my home, so I'd get a zinc supplement, store it in your home. Get the actual quinine, whether you can get it in a supplement or you can get it in tonic water or whatever, store it in your home. And when you do get these fever-like symptoms and all that, and you know you've got the damn thing, then use those things to basically, because at the end of the day, you want to keep the viral load going into your lungs as low as possible, and how successful it gets in there. So that's one strategy. So you've got the strategy of basically reducing replication in the lungs, and also with zinc, and also using quinine to get it in there in greater amounts. So that's the important things. Now, also there are some aminos that do. So you always have to take zinc with food. The best food is meat. Ground beef or stuff like that, fantastic. That's what you really want to get it in with meat. Why? Because there are 2 amino acids that also increase the uptake of zinc from the gut: methionine and also histidine. Red meat is one of the highest sources of both. So that's what you really want to basically get it in to help, get it through into your system. Now, there's another component that we need to take into consideration, which is basically the angiotensin recycling enzyme 2. Now, that's the one I've mentioned before. You've heard me bang on about it enough, and I sound like a broken record bringing it up. But there are a few new things that I've just focused on recently in regards to. One is things that we do in terms of supplementation. Some people do that could be a problem. That up now. Yep, here it is. Okay, so this is basically resveratrol. Now, or resveratrol, a lot of people are using it for longevity purposes, for increasing sirtuins and stuff like that. Stick to fasting, stick to exercise, stick to that. Dump the resveratrol for now, because it does upregulate angiotensin converting enzyme 2. And that's the pathway the virus uses to get into your lungs. So if you're on resveratrol, dump it for the time being until we're over the crisis, because it will be a problem for you. So keep that in mind in that regard. So do not do. Okay. This is the Greek study out of Greece. Available drugs to battle coronavirus. Actually looking at, so Greek scientists from the Athens School of Medicine have joined dozens of renowned scientists from Humanitas University in Italy, University of Valencia, Spain, and the Yale University in the US. Hoped that drugs reduce the risk of pulmonary complications. That means lungs complications, death related to the new coronavirus. And they've actually, looking at this drug, I'm going to even highlight it properly. Bad Harry. Cytokine, whatever. It's basically works to moderate the overproduction of immune cells and the activation of compounds called cytokines. Remember that our little viral storm in that regard? We've got vitamin D3, don't forget. And basically they're looking at that. They pretty much use this for treating gout and pericarditis, which is basically inflammation of the heart membrane. Not a good thing. So there is a proviso if you do get your hands or are able to get this drug to use at a time when you've got it on the side, it's in your toolkit. So you get the disease and you go, okay, fuck, I need to prevent a cytokine storm, so I'm going to take a normal. Don't go overboard with these things. There are certain levels of toxicity in all these things. So take a normal level to basically deal with that. You may already be taking it for gout. So, good for you. Just keep this in mind. Keep away from grapefruit, because grapefruit can cause side effects. So, yes, so definitely keep away from that if you're going to use this pathway. So keep that in mind, guys. We want to avoid these sort of complications and issues. Now, how do we deal with the angiotensin recycling enzyme 2? Well, the other way of dealing with it is with some herbal stuff that can suppress it. These are the sort of herbs that basically, yes, I actually did make a little nice little image. Yes, I didn't put a lot of information next to it, unfortunately. That's sheer laziness on my part. These are things that have been identified, and in this study here. So this study is one that I sort of came across accidentally. I'm not going to tell you how or where. It's not peer reviewed. It's between a school in 2 authors, one out of Stanford and one out of the University of Hong Kong, and they have looked at the 2019 coronavirus, the novel coronavirus it's called, caused pneumonia outbreaks in China and continues to expand. So blah, 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 converting enzyme 2, ACE2, so blah, 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 which is the same receptor that SARS-CoV, both 1 and 2. Targeting ACE2 holds the promise of preventing 2019 novel corona infection. So basically, if it can't get in the lungs, well, it can't really do much damage. So they are looking at these herbs here. So these are different plant types, compounds, and all that. We'll go through them. I do have questions with some of them, issues. And we will just cycle through now my folder. Where is it? Okay. So we will look at them back to front. Well, I like to confuse people. Actually, this one here can be found in licorice. So it's a compound of it. So it's, that's the cheap man's option. You could get it into a supplement. That's true as well. So that's an option to basically inhibit this, pathway that the actual, that this novel virus actually uses. Very important to keep that in mind. So this one here, we'll go to the next one. The problem with this one here is that it's also a metal chelator, which, if you've got metal toxicity and issues like that, yes, it can be useful, but there could be some interactions with other minerals as well, and I'm not that crash hot on it, let's put it that way. And I've looked at plants and I just can't find any good stuff to really confidently put my hand on my heart and say, yeah, let's go for this, guys. I think this is beaut. No, I think I'll hold off from that. This one here can be found in citric plants. I think I can't remember now. I looked at it earlier. Don't know which folder I've got the damn study, but anyway, the whole reason isn't to look at studies with these things. It's just to identify these things that we can actually use. So, if you want to use some citric plants juices like citric juice, lemon juice, or stuff like that, good idea. That helps as well. So that's another option. Let's look at this little thing. This is a sort of another herb that has similar effects. You can this one is actually quite cheap and quite easy to get to. That comes in two forms. I'll just so it comes in this Scutellaria butter flower. So it comes from that. You can see I'm fucking useless at pronouncing some of these things. And the other ones, Chloroquine latoriflora. I've probably killed the living daylights out of that translation. There's probably herbalists out there that go, what the fuck? Pronunciation is absolutely abysmal. Yep, sorry. I'm less concerned about pronunciation, more about getting the information out to people. And so these sort of compounds are quite useful as well in that regard. In the final one, of those is this one here, Cytokine. This is what it looks like, a bit like the others, actually, probably related. Just the sort of leaves are a bit different, and the flowering is slightly different, similar color, nice purple. And this one here, there's actually better. A lot of the herbal stuff is problematic. They have been able to identify this non-peer-reviewed, hasn't been published. So, as I said earlier, this isn't published information, but they have actually shown in this study that basically it does inhibit this pathway, which is useful because that's really. Now, there is, on this one at least, there is basically Bacalene reduces blood lipids and inflammation in patients with coronary artery disease, rheumatoid arthritis in a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled. So at least we know that's pretty good for arthritic. So if you've got arthritic, double the bonus, triple the bonus if you've basically got, arterial issues as well. So that's another study if people want to go and look at it. So it's not some dodgy. This one isn't a dodgy herb of any sort. It does also affect high sensitivity to C-reactive protein. So it's a good option. I like it. Looks pretty as well. That's the thing that does it for you. Does it a bit for me. And yeah, okay. That'll be with a humour. And getting back to it, these are some of the options, guys, of actually looking at, sort of reducing the effects. But I did want to cover in terms of the find that. Got it. It's the worst thing when you want to find something when you really need it, you can't remember where you put it. Yes, it's one of those things. Not there, not there. one. Definitely not there. Yeah, I can't remember where I've actually got it. Just, just to cover that point as well, and this is, please do not quote me on this because I just cannot remember where I've got it. There it is somewhere. There's a list of basically the sort of the blood pressure type tablets that a lot of people take, and they can be a problem in that regard. But I just, so if you're basically on an ACE inhibitor or I think it's ARB, there's an ARB one, and there's an angiotensin 2 receptor blockers, I think they're called. So there's a couple of blood pressure tablets out there which basically tend to, the body, because in its response, will upregulate that pathway, and it can be complicating, especially when you're trying to take these herbs to sort of bring it down and you're taking the blood pressure tablets. And if you remember my earlier video where I actually showed quite clearly that some of the highest group that wasn't cardiovascular, people with cardiovascular diabetes or whatever, the highest group was people with high blood pressure. And it's because of this angiotensin recycling enzyme 2 that, the virus uses to get itself into the lungs, into the body, in different parts of the different tissue in the body. And, and this is a problem that you've got when you're taking blood pressure tablets. So if you're on blood pressure tablets, you need to basically go and chat with your doctor and try and actually get on different medication that doesn't involve this pathway, or basically just dump the sugar and get on a low carb diet. For God's sake, grow up. Realize that drugs are not going to fix your ailments. It's about time people pulled their finger out and dumped the carbs and started doing a bit of fasting, and tried to get their health back. Because if you've got high blood pressure and you're in one of those groups, you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable to be taken out by this COVID-19 virus. So keep that in mind. I hope this has sort of helped sort of clear up a number of things, provide some tools in your toolkit to basically deal with this virus. Take care, as always. I hope you're well and your families are well as well. We'll chat soon in my live streams. Please like and subscribe, and please share this as wide as possible, because at the end of the day, I can do this, but if it's not shared out and that information doesn't get out, people will not know what things they need to add to their toolkit, and they will suffer the consequences because of that. Anyway, take care. See you guys, and have a good day.